with couples sometimes who maybe are not walking with the Lord, and they have been living together for 7 years and they're thinking about getting married. And so they're kind of in the place of an old married couple and they do have resentment at that point. And so it really depends on the situation as to how much we need to dig into that. But I think where people get caught up is they think, well, I can't forgive because the person doesn't realize that they did something wrong, or they haven't admitted, or they haven't apologized, or they haven't stopped doing it. And so I can't forgive them. And I think it's really, really important that you still realize that you need to forgive. There are three reasons. One is for
Hey, what's going on, fam? Hey, it's your boy Kev, and
Tanya.
hey, man, we're here for another session of Couples Connect, man, and we have an amazing guest for you, as always. You know how Couples Connect goes down.
You know how we do.
So, without further delay, man, we're gonna get right into this thing because we got some great topics to talk about today. So, please help us welcome Kelly Case to Couples Connect, guys. Yes,
Welcome, Kelly.
So, hey, Miss Kelly, what's going on with you?
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, man. So
we're excited to have you.
We are. So we're gonna get into this thing. We're gonna get right into it. Tell the people, man, because I really want to put your credentials out there. Let people know that we're not just talking to anybody. I want people to know who we're speaking to, who we're talking to, and all this great advice you're going to be giving us today. I want to let them know that this coming from a reputable person, professional person. So tell us a little bit about you, Kelly Case.
Yeah, my name is Kelly Case, and I am a licensed professional clinical counselor specializing in marriage and family. I do almost exclusively marriage and relationship coaching and counseling, and I am also a YouTube podcast host myself.
Yes. Talk about that podcast. We're gonna drop that in the show notes. But what's the name of your podcast?
Yeah, it's called Unhindered with Kelly Case.
Love it. I love it. So, Miss Kelly Case, man, my wife, you got your ladies were talking about some topics and stuff, and I think my wife's excited about these topics, man. So we're gonna get right into this thing, so we can kind of give people some nuggets, some tips, and all that good stuff around these topics today. So, baby, what you got?
So we're talking about resentment, vulnerability, and maybe a little bit of infidelity. That is some of the things that you have mentioned that you are, kind of well versed in, amongst the other things that you're versed in. But we really want to know about resentment because within marriages, there is a lot of resentment going on. I know of couples who are holding resentment and it's causing them to move forward in their relationship with each other. It's causing emotional instability. It's causing all kinds of things in their marriage. And so we want to hear from the expert on what does that look like, how can we prevent it, and some red flags. So talk to us about resentment.
Sure. Yeah, I think that resentment is one of the biggest issues that I see among couples. And in fact, it's one of the places that I start from the very beginning when I start working with them because it can really taint every other aspect of marriage if we don't deal with that first. Sometimes they don't even realize that they're carrying around some bitterness. They're lugging it around with them like a big backpack that they're carrying, and it's weighing them down and it's keeping them from connecting and it's keeping them from progressing in the relationship. And sometimes it's not until I point it out that they go, oh yeah, I got a lot of contempt sitting here. I got a lot of bitterness deep down in there towards my spouse from things from the past. And so it's really important that we deal with that right from the beginning.
What would be your definition, or what is the definition of resentment? Because it may show up and people don't even really recognize that that's what they're doing, right?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, resentment and unforgiveness, I think, are synonyms. So, just that hurt that you feel when somebody had said something that hurt you, or sometimes it's something they did, sometimes it's something they didn't do that you wish they would have done, or you thought they should have done, and you're just kind of holding on to that, and it's made you build a wall to protect yourself. So you're kind of like, I don't know if I feel safe with my spouse. And, maybe we'll get into this, but sometimes it doesn't even have anything to do with your spouse. It might be that you have walls up because of hurt that you've had from before your spouse. And you
Mm.
already kind of had those walls up. So that's a little bit different than resentment. And maybe I can get into that later. But when it comes to resenting your spouse, it really is that you've put some walls up because of something they did or didn't do. And that made you feel a little less safe with them than you used to.
Wow. I like it.
Yeah. So where does if you were counseling someone before they even, right now they're in pre-marriage, so they're getting premarital counseling, would you bring up resentment in that conversation so that they can know what to look for and how to keep it from even happening? Or is resentment a 100% guarantee in a marriage relationship?
Good question. I don't think it's guaranteed, but it's common. It's very common. And yes, in premarital counseling, I do bring it up. At that point, they are often like, "Oh no, we're so in love. We don't have any bitterness towards each other. We think life's going to be grand and wonderful and perfect." And so it's hard for them to kind of see how that can mess them up later. But I do warn them about that. I have couples sometimes who maybe you're not walking with the Lord, and they have been living together for 7 years, and they're thinking about getting married, and so they're kind of in the place of an old married couple, and they do have resentment at that point. And so it really depends on the situation as to how much we need to dig into that. But I think where people get caught up is they think, well, I can't forgive because the person doesn't realize that they did something wrong, or they haven't admitted, or they haven't apologized, or they haven't stopped doing it. And so I can't forgive them. And I think it's really, really important that you still realize that you need to forgive. There are three reasons. One is for yourself, even having nothing to do with your marriage or your spouse or anything else. If you're holding on to bitterness, that's harming you. Research has shown that unforgiveness can increase your risk of heart attack. It can make you not sleep well. It can make you have physical pain, increase your blood pressure, lower your immune system, cause anxiety, cause depression. And sometimes people don't realize that the reason they're not sleeping well, the reason they're not feeling well, is because they've got a lot of bitterness inside. And so I always start with, this is not just about your marriage. This is also for you. And then secondly, if you want your marriage to survive, if you want your marriage to not only survive, but thrive, then you have to deal with these things that you're holding on to, because it will it will taint, it will put a black coating on everything else in the marriage. It's like you can't resolve conflict if you're bitter towards your spouse. You can't communicate well if you're bitter towards your spouse. You can't um, support them like you need to. You can't have good sex. It's like every area of the marriage is affected. And so if we don't deal with that bitterness, it's going to be hard. People come in and they say, "Oh, we just need help communicating." That's right. Every couple that comes in says, "We need help communicating." And I'm like, let's roll it back, because I can give you communication skills. But if you're holding all this resentment towards your spouse, it's not going to do any good. So we have to kind of start with the basics first. And then obviously the third reason that we need to forgive is because Jesus tells us to, because the Bible tells us to. So not everybody that I see is a believer, but if they are, I can talk to them about the importance of, they have been forgiven much. So they don't have a right to withhold that from somebody else.
You made such a great point when you said about communication, because a lot of times we think that's what it is. And a lot of times you hear the reason for divorce sometimes is communication.
Mm-hmm.
But what is to unpack with that communication? I never thought about it like that.
Exactly.
And it is a lot of resentment. And like you said earlier, that we don't know that we're holding on to resentment. And I know that resentment can start with like little small things. It builds up and builds up. What are some of the red flags that people can look out for when it comes to resentment? Because we do know that resentment causes detachment
Mm-hmm.
from each
Mm-hmm.
other. So what are some red flags that we can look for?
Yeah, if you think about it, what is it like to live being stuck in your woundedness? What is it like to carry around resentment? Well, it often looks like um, talking about that person a lot to other people, talking about them to your friends or to your parents, complaining about them a lot. If you find yourself always talking about what they're doing wrong, you're probably carrying around some resentment towards them. If you find yourself driving down the street thinking about how irritated you are with them, often you probably are carrying some resentment. If you lay in bed at night and you're trying to go to sleep and you can't because you're thinking about how much they hurt you or how bothered you are by them, I think those are some red flags that say, hey, you got some bitterness to deal with.
So simple, right?
Hmm.
But when you say it out loud, it makes so much sense
Hmm.
that when you're, going through the motions of those things, that is a sign of resentment.
Yeah.
I know we've been married for 24 years, and I know I've had resentment toward my husband. I'm sure he's headed toward me. But one of the things that I had to do was I had to look at my own self, and that I had to go inward and see why I'm holding on to this resentment. And a lot of times, part of it is our fault because we're not communicating or don't have the skills to communicate. But one of the things that I did is that I had went on a walk, and walking is very therapeutic for me. And I asked God to renew my heart when it came to what the resentment that I felt toward Kevin. I asked God to renew my heart, and I promise you, instantly, I felt that renewal because I was very sincere about what I was asking for. Um, and I'm just wondering if that is advice that you give to your patients.
Yeah, so I think what you're
Right.
talking about is how do you let go of it? How do you get rid of resentment and forgive? And before I get to that, I usually have to go through what is forgiveness and what is it not, because people have a lot of ideas about what they think forgiveness is. And this usually is the most helpful when they realize what it really means to forgive. So forgiveness is choosing, making a decision to purposely and intentionally and actively let go of those feelings, to put them in the past, to set them aside, to move forward from them, to let go of a need for revenge, a need to hold on to it, a need to protect yourself with it. And it's done not because they deserve it or because they've earned it necessarily, but it's a grace. It's a mercy that you're giving them. And I often will take something in my office and say, let's pretend this is all your hurt, all the resentment you have. And I will have them physically go outside and set this outside. And I say, we're setting this outside now. It's not with you anymore. It's not going to be with you anymore. And they come back and they say, dang it. Do you know how many times I've thought about that? This is a plant, but in my office, it's a light. They say, do you know how many times I've thought about that light? Every time it comes up, I think, no, I put that light outside. I don't have it anymore. I chose to go put it outside and not keep it with me anymore. And it's a great visual. But what forgiveness is not, it is not diminishing or taking away the gravity of what's happened. And often people think that it is. They think it's saying that it was no big deal and that it didn't really mean that much. If I forgive it, it's like saying it doesn't really matter. Like it's easy, it's no big deal. And so I have to explain to people, no, if there's something to forgive, that's because there was something, right? If it was no big deal, there'd be nothing to forgive. And no amount of bringing it up over and over and over again is going to make it better. You can't keep rubbing it in and putting it in their face and talking about it all the time and thinking that that is going to make it better. The other thing is forgiveness. People think, oh, I can't forgive because I still feel hurt. Well, you're still going to feel hurt. You know, if something has been done to you, as you've been wronged or you've been sinned against or whatever it is, whether it's big or small, it's going to hurt when you think about it because it was hurtful to you. And so just because it hurts when you think about it doesn't mean that you haven't forgiven or that you can't forgive. That's normal and that's natural. And it also, people will say, "Oh, I feel like I'm just giving them permission to do it again if I forgive." So I have to keep reminding them, like, that's not okay. That's not okay. What you did to me was not okay, so that they know that they can't do it again, whether that be infidelity or whether that be the way they talk to them or whatever it was, big or small. And so forgiveness is not saying that it's okay. Forgiveness is not giving them permission to do it again. It is just saying, this is in the past. I'm going to leave it in the past. I'm not going to keep bringing it into our present. I'm going to choose to leave it back there again. Um, and there's no guarantee that you're not going to get hurt again
Yeah.
by that person. There is no guarantee. Um, and another thing is, people think that forgiveness means forgetting. You got to forgive and forget. And sometimes people think, oh, the Bible says to forgive and forget. But when God says, I will remember your sins no more, he didn't mean he's going to have amnesia. God is omniscient. He knows everything. That actual root word from the Bible where it says, I will remember your sins no more, means to remember. So I picture it like Barbie had her arm broken off, and that's her sin. And God said, I will never take that arm and remember it to you. I will never reattach it to you. It is as far as the east is from the west. And that's what we want to do with our spouses. We want to take this and we want to not have it membered to them anymore. We want it to be outside and it's not attached to them anymore. We're not going to hold it against them. We're not going to try to get revenge. So it doesn't mean you have amnesia. It doesn't mean you forget and you don't know what happened. It just means you're not remembering it to them. And lastly, people think that if they forgive, they have to trust the person right away. And that's not realistic. You can forgive someone and never, ever, ever trust them again. You know, if you think of someone that's not your spouse, let's say somebody maybe was molested as a child and they've gone through a process and they've forgiven their molester, it doesn't mean they're ever going to trust that person. It doesn't mean they're going to take their children over to that person's house. So trust is not a requirement for forgiving someone. And the same goes with your spouse. That trust has to be earned and it has to be rebuilt. And so circling back around to what I think you were asking with renewing your heart, the way that you forgive is just to make a decision. Just to say, I've decided that I'm going to carry this. I'm going to set it outside. I'm going to put it in the past. I'm going to leave it in the past. And every single time that it comes to my mind, I'm going to take that thought captive and I'm going to say, nope, I forgave this. I forgave this. And sometimes a decision you have to make over and over again when it comes to your mind. I'm going to choose not to ruminate on this. I'm going to forfeit my right to think about it. I'm going to forfeit my right to get revenge. I'm going to forfeit my right to complain about it because I chose to leave it in the past.
Whoa.
Man, that's so good. You know, that the whole forgiving piece, you know, forgiveness is, it's, it's come up in topics in some of our previous, episodes with other people. And it continues to be like a major crossroad for so many people to overcome. Right. And it's almost to the point to where, you know, some people, I feel like counseling may be the only thing that can maybe help them to kind of, you know, give them practical steps of, you know, how to get on the road of healing, you know, and to forgiving, you know, their whoever offended them in whatever kind of way. But that forgiveness piece is just such a roadblock, man. It's a major part of a hardness in people's heart that they just sometimes it's hard to let go, you know? So, and what do you, how do you help? I know like you said, it's just a decision. Make the decision to just do it. But again, you know, sometimes it's easier said than done. Do you give any practical processes or anything like that to help them on the journey of forgiveness?
I think that all the things I just shared, when I
Yeah.
really go through those with people and I really help them understand that it doesn't mean it's okay and it doesn't mean you won't hurt and it doesn't mean you'll trust them again. They're like, oh, okay, well then I could probably do that then. But it's all those false beliefs people have around what it means to forgive that are tripping them up, because they're like, I can't do that. I can't not hurt, and I can't forget it. And I can't, feel safe, and I can't trust again. It's like, well, you don't have to, in order to decide every time that comes up that you're going to let it go and you're not going to hold it against the person. And I think the harder things to forgive are things that are not in the past. They're continually happening in the present. And you have to forgive 70 times 7. Those are the harder ones.
I also think that sometimes it's hard to forgive because, like you said, we don't want to be hurt again. And in order for us to forgive, we have to learn how to love again. Because if we don't love again, we can't experience the other side of that. But we feel like if we open up to love again, we're gonna get hurt again.
Yes.
And so that keeps us from that is what takes, I believe, forgiveness so long, because we don't allow ourselves to open up and love again.
Which is the whole trust factor, yeah.
There's trust, yes, and then actually you're tapping into where I usually take couples next, so you are on the right track. So once they get a firm understanding of what it means to forgive, to let go of that resentment, and they make that decision, the very next thing I take them into is, okay, it's time to be vulnerable, which is what you're talking about.
Yes.
Opening up to love
Vulnerability.
again. Ooh, taking down those walls. That is
Mhm.
scary.
Very.
Now, if there's a lot of trust issues, I'll work on that first before I go into vulnerability. So if it's a case of infidelity, we're going to work on a time period of building trust back up first. But vulnerability is so, so important. If you cannot be vulnerable with your spouse, then you're not actually connected with them. If you have, because vulnerable means, some people think vulnerable means being weak, like crying and having a bunch of feelings and emotions. That's not what vulnerable means. Yes, that can be an example of being vulnerable, but being vulnerable just is the opposite of weak, I think, because weak people are not vulnerable. Weak people are guarded. Weak people, insecure people, they have a lot of walls up. They're highly protected. If somebody's vulnerable, that means they have taken down their walls. They're open. They're unguarded. They're not hiding anything. They're being very honest, and they're open. So the actual definition of vulnerability is the quality or state of exposing yourself to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally. So you are exposing yourself to the possibility of being harmed. Weak people don't do that. Strong people do that. And so, and you shouldn't do it with everyone. It's not smart to be vulnerable with everyone. There are a lot of unsafe people in the world. But if you want to have a close connection with someone, whether that's your spouse, a family member, a friend, the only way to get connected is to be vulnerable, because you cannot connect with someone if there's a wall between you.
Man, listen, yes. I'm gonna just say yes, yes, yes.
And amen.
Because because man, that's so true, because I do believe, in terms of just being vulnerable, if that vulnerability is not there and it's not there, you could feel the disconnect. There's a major disconnect when the vulnerability is not, 100% there. So really, really practicing that vulnerability is super, super important, man. I think, because man, if you really want to fully connect with, with, if it's a spouse or whatever, any individual, vulnerability is definitely a part of the process, to have that full connection. So
Yes.
that was dead on.
Yeah. Could you unpack vulnerability just a little bit more when it comes to vulnerability and emotionality or whatever? Can you unpack that? Because, in order to make that connection and be vulnerable with someone, you have to also have that emotional connection with that person and feel safe there. And a lot of times that's what's happening in relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. So, to be connected, you have to be emotionally vulnerable. And you're exactly right. There's 3 reasons that I find that people are hesitant to be vulnerable. 3 reasons they have walls up. The first is that their spouse has hurt them and they don't feel safe with their spouse. The second is that someone else has hurt them, probably before they even met their spouse, and they put some walls up and they've had them up the whole time they've been married because of hurt that they had in the past. And the third reason that I find people struggling to be vulnerable is just because of their own shame. Their own shame that they think maybe they're not lovable. Maybe there's something really deeply flawed with them. And if they truly open themselves up, they will not be accepted by their spouse. And so they keep walls up because of their own insecurities. And when I say shame, I want to differentiate that from guilt. So let's say you yelled at your kids and you felt bad about it. If you feel like I feel guilty because I feel bad about my behavior and I wish I hadn't acted like that, that's guilt. But if you think I yelled at my kids, that means I am a bad person, that's shame. So shame is more about like, I feel bad about who I am on the inside, my character, not just my behavior. And when you have a lot of shame and you don't feel worthy of being truly loved by someone, then sometimes you'll struggle with vulnerability. So when it comes to your spouse, if you want a real connection with your spouse, then that means you want your spouse to be vulnerable with you. Because that's the only way you can have a real connection with them. And the only way that they're going to be vulnerable with you is if you provide a safe environment for them to do that. So I don't care what the reason was. Maybe you did something to hurt them, someone else did something to hurt them, or they have a lot of personal shame. No matter what, the answer is the same. The answer is be a safe person for them to be vulnerable with. And of course, you want them to be a safe person for you, but you can't control them. You can only make sure that you're being a safe person. And you know, when I tell couples, well, you're both listening to what I'm saying, so hopefully you'll both start being safe people. So ways to you want your spouse to not be in fight or flight. You want them to feel like they can let those walls down, they can be vulnerable, they can be themselves, and they will be accepted. Doesn't mean you'll like everything that they say and do, but you're going to love them unconditionally. And some ways to provide that safe environment. One, don't push their buttons. So we all know what our spouse's buttons are, but we're supposed to know them so we can avoid pushing them, not so we can push them. So don't purposely push your spouse's buttons because that's going to make them feel like they're not safe with you. You're trying to trigger them. You're trying to trip them up. They got to be on guard. Don't share their mistakes or their inadequacies with other people. You go out with friends and you're like, oh yeah, well, he's this and that. And you're telling all his flaws, all his weaknesses to other people. He's going to be like, I can't share those with you anymore because you're not safe. You go out and you tell other people about my weaknesses. We all have weaknesses. Don't micromanage your spouse because that communicates, I don't believe in you. I don't think you can do this on your own. I think I'm better than you. And that's not going to make them want to open up and be vulnerable with you. Don't criticize them. Don't make fun of them. Don't judge them. Criticism is a killer in a relationship. As soon as you're criticized by your spouse, you instantly put a little wall up. You instantly distance yourself a little bit and you think, you don't get me. You don't understand me. I don't know if my heart is totally safe with you because you're criticizing me. Now, I'm not saying never criticize because sometimes constructive criticism is needed and marriage is here to grow us, right? But you just have to use it very sparingly and carefully because I find couples have a lot more criticism than they do praise and compliments. And once it starts outweighing that, you start to put walls up and you think, I'm not safe with this person. Another thing that couples do that creates an unsafe environment is using their spouse's words against them later. So let's say your wife is really vulnerable with you and she says, you know, I got to admit that I struggle a little bit with overspending. I'm spending when I shouldn't be. And I think I could use some accountability there. And you're like, okay, you listen. A couple months later, wash machine breaks and you don't have money to fix it. And you say, well, you're the one who said, you even admitted it. You're the overspender. It's your fault that we don't have money. Do you think she's ever going to confess what she's struggling with again? Probably not. Shouldn't feel safe. Likewise, let's say a man confesses that he's been looking at porn. And later they're in the bedroom and the wife is like, oh, you probably just want to do this position because you saw it on some porn video. throwing it back in his face to ruin their intimate night, he's probably not going to want to, open up to her again. So you have to be really careful about not using your spouse's words against them later. And just be on the same side, be on the same team. It's not a competition. It's not who's the better driver, who's better with the kids, who's better with the money. If it feels like a competition, they're not going to feel safe. Be loyal, be committed. Don't make them feel like you're still keeping your options open. Don't threaten divorce. How are they going to ever feel safe to be fully vulnerable with you if they feel like you're not really sure you're going to stay in this relationship anyway? And just, be selfless. Listen to them with compassion and empathy, and try to understand and put yourself in their shoes. So I'm sure as you guys are listening to me, you can see all of these things. Man, if a spouse was doing all of the things, the other one would feel so safe.
This episode of Couples Connect is sponsored by Just Like You Hair Care System. Introducing Just Like You Hair Care, the perfect solution for healthy, growing, moisturized hair. Our hair growth oil is enriched with essential oils like calendula, lavender, rose petals, also enriched with nourishing jojoba oil, promoting growth, reducing breakage, and restoring scalp health. Follow with our moisturizing leave-in cream to lock in hydration for smooth, manageable hair all day long. So you get to feel confident with thicker, stronger, and deeply moisturized hair. Our products are made with all natural ingredients and is designed for women or anyone who want a holistic approach to hair wellness. Shop today and experience the transformation. Just Like You Hair Care, your hair, your confidence, and your journey. The link is in the show notes. Now back to the episode. Kelly.
Girl,
we
have to send you a little something in the mail, girl. You doing a counseling session right now.
You are. You just really touched on some really key points. And you touched on, don't, if your spouse is coming to you and they've been vulnerable with you, don't judge them, don't shame them because they're not going to come back to you again because they don't feel safe. So when that happens, and I'm sure it happens a lot in marriages, what can that person do to begin to feel safe? Like the spouse who doesn't feel safe, what does that spouse do to begin to feel safe and open up again? If she or he feels like they're just going to be judged anyway by their spouse, so why should I even share?
Yeah. Well, I'd say if your spouse isn't a safe person, then I don't advise you to be vulnerable because they're not safe. I mean, you shouldn't be vulnerable with unsafe people. So ideally, I'd be counseling the couple, and I'd be helping the person who's not been safe to become a safer person. And I'd be counseling the person who needs to open up again to, hey, take a chance, take a small chance, start to be vulnerable with some small things, see how they handle it, see if they are really trying, if they're improving. I mean, it's a process you got to work towards. Sometimes a lot of damage has been done already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just really some good perspective, some good way to look at things. And, because I think, not every couple look at it that way, so just with us talking to you right now, it's like you're that third person, right? And just kind of hearing it from the outside, from someone, and it really just kind of opens, your eyes to some things. And it's just really, really good information, because I'm pretty sure, many people out there are probably dealing with a lot of the situations that you're talking about now. And I think this is something that can really shed some light on it, just like it's shedding some light on us, to really help some marriages out there. So good stuff, Kelly, man. Really, really good stuff.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm sharing this in a short form today, but I have obviously when I'm working with couples, sometimes we're spending multiple sessions, just on this topic and trying to learn how to get better at this. And also, I do have an online program that couples can do, and I have a whole video just on this topic, and then I have specific homework that they can each work on separately to improve in this area, things for them to think about, action steps for them to take. So that's at firstclassmarriage.com if anybody's interested in checking that out.
I love it. I love it.
I have maybe one more question for you, and it's also around vulnerability. I wrote it down, so I'm going to read from my little pad.
Okay.
Um, is there a way to be vulnerable while still maintaining emotional boundaries, especially in the face of unresolved defensiveness?
What do you mean by unresolved defensiveness?
Um, Maybe someone was, someone was having a disagreement, right? A couple was having a disagreement, and the person got defensive because, hey, I'm sharing with you something that I feel that I see with you and I don't like it, and I'm sharing it with you because I wanted to fix it. That person gets very defensive, and and then all of a sudden we fix nothing. We don't even communicate about it because you know that person got defensive.
Hmm.
So what do you do in that situation when it's unresolved, and still trying to have boundaries around that?
So you're saying you want to still bring that up again. You want to still talk about that because it's still bothering you, and you're
Yeah,
being vulnerable to share this. This is bothering me. But in the past, when you've tried to share that, the person has, you've been met with defensiveness. Is that what you're
yeah,
saying?
yeah. Because I be around a lot of women because I'm a hairstylist, and so I hear these conversations all the time,
Hmm.
and and so it's just to clear the air with that and maybe help someone um, who may be dealing with that.
I think it's important how you communicate to the person who's being defensive. So if you come at it like you did this wrong and you did that and you hurt me and da da, da, they're going to be defensive. If you use the words always, you always do this or you never do this, guess what they're going to do? They're going to give you the one time that that was not true, the one time they did do it when you said they never do it. So that's going to, and so there are a lot of things that bring up defensiveness in people. And so in that situation, we kind of start to go into communication techniques and how do you communicate to someone in a way that lessens the chance that they're going to be defensive. Now, obviously, you cannot guarantee that they won't be because some people are defensive very easily, and you can't really control that. But I think the more that you speak from a, hey, I'm just really, this may be me, but this is just really how I'm feeling, and this is how it affected me, and I don't know if you meant it that way, and you know kind of giving them the benefit of the doubt even if you don't totally really buy it. But just trying to give them the benefit of the doubt and saying this might just be me, or this is just, but this is what I need, this is what I feel, and I can't help it. This is just where I'm at with it, and I need something to be different. Does that help? Does that answer?
Yeah, that answered. Yeah, that was good because it's just, I guess it's just unpacking, like you said, that communication around all of this
Mhm.
resentment, being vulnerable. Even we didn't touch on infidelity that much, but even around infidelity, um, just admitting stuff to your spouse. I don't know. It's a lot
Yeah.
around this that needs to be unpacked. But you did such an awesome job unpacking resentment and vulnerability for us tonight. I mean, you did such an awesome job with that. You have any?
Thank you.
So what are some of the main things, Kelly, that you see, when you're talking to couples in general, that, some of the biggest struggles? What's some of the biggest struggles that you see out there?
Well, infidelity is a big one. I
Mm-hmm.
often have people coming to me once that has taken place. People often wait way too long to seek counsel.
Mm.
They either their marriage is at a breaking point and there has been infidelity or there hasn't, but a lot of times people are coming to me as a last ditch effort, which makes my job real challenging because there is so much to unpack then at that point. So I think my biggest advice to people is don't wait. If you feel any resentment, if you feel that you have walls up, if you guys are fighting a lot, if you're not having sex, get counsel. Don't try to fix it. When your light comes on in your car, you don't just ignore it and keep looking at it. But yet when the most important thing in our life, our marriage, is flashing a warning sign, people often just let it go. And I think that a lot of times it's because they believe it's their spouse's fault, and they believe that their spouse is not going to change. So what good will it do to go to counseling? They're broken and they can't be fixed, so it's not going to do any good. But there is so much, like things I just barely touched on tonight, there's so much that they don't know that I can share with them, that I can teach them, that will be helpful. And so don't wait. All the things, you're asking, what do I see with couples? I see resentment. I see lack of vulnerability. I see dirty fighting, just poor communication, doing all the wrong things that make people more defensive, things that escalate a conflict instead of de-escalate it. I see a lot of sexual issues. I often joke that I'm really just a sex therapist because I see a myriad of sexual issues that come in all different ways. And also another thing is a lack of understanding about gender differences. Oftentimes women think their husband should be like a woman and men think their wives should be like a man. And I'm like, no, that doesn't work that way. So I have to teach them these differences are normal. There's not actually something wrong with your spouse. They're just being what a woman is or just being what a man is. And help them to understand there's a lot of differences in how we think and how we relate to one another and how we communicate. And so understanding that also makes a big difference.
Can you break a little bit of that down? As far as like understand that your husband is different and the wife is different?
Yeah, there's a lot to be broken down. One is just in the ways that we communicate. One is in the way that we think. So there's a book that I love called Women Are Spaghetti, Men Are Waffles. I don't know if you guys have heard of that one.
No.
Just the way our brains are wired. So men's brains are often described like a waffle that has all the little squares in it. And you put syrup, the syrup falls in the squares, and the syrup in one square does not touch the syrup in the other squares. And women are like spaghetti. Every noodle is touching every noodle, and every noodle is connected, and everything in our brain is connected to everything. Every relationship, every emotion, every task we on our day, they're just all lumped in there like a plate of spaghetti. Another way to think about that is a man has a lot of rooms in his brain, and a woman is an open concept. Open concept house. So everything's in the same room and everything's affecting everything. And so when it comes to communication, one of the things that people don't realize is a lot of women don't realize, they're talking about, oh yeah, by the way, when I came home, there was the van was making a funny noise. And so, but anyway, I came in the house and I was talking to Susie about her soccer game tonight. And then I realized that, oh yeah, I really wanted to meet Susie's friend Samantha's parents at the soccer game tonight because I'm really worried about who she's been hanging out with. And I mean, it goes from the van to the soccer game to the parents that they want to meet. And the man is still in the garage thinking, his head, he's in the garage thinking about the fact that the van was making a weird noise. And then when you get done talking about Samantha's parents and he doesn't have the reaction that you want him to have, you're like, are you even listening to me? Well, he's like, I wasn't out of that room yet, and you went to 4 other rooms, and you left me back in that room. And so I will tell people, ask your husband if he's ready to leave that room before you go on to talk about something that's happened in another room. And he will usually say, actually, no, I'm not. Actually, I have another question. Actually, what kind of noise was that? And how long has it been making? I kind of want to flush that out a little more before we go on to the next topic, and then I will follow you to the next room. So that's just one. I mean, I could give you a million examples.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was good, man. I mean, our last podcast, we talking about closing windows. Now we go into rooms. So we all up in this house. Just trying to figure it all out. But that was a good analogy. It really was, really man. Good analogy. Especially the spaghetti and the waffles. That was that was right on point for sure. So
yeah. I like that. And then the other thing is just, men and women have different needs, and being okay with that, understanding that, and learning what each other needs.
What are men and women's needs? What do you in your profession? What are a woman's need and what's a man's need?
Well, I probably won't. I'm not prepared to give you a comprehensive list, so I'm sure I'll miss some things. But women have more of a need usually, and of course I always say usually because there are exceptions to everything. A man might say, "Oh, I feel that, I need that." Okay, well, you're in the minority there. Some men are more like women, some women are more like men.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, women have more of a need for closure than men do. So I have a daughter and two sons, and my daughter got mad at me, go in a room and slam her door, and it was 3 days before she was over it. And my sons, they'll go in 10 minutes later, they'll come out and be like, "Hey mom, what's for dinner?" Like they were never mad, like nothing happened, and they don't need to talk about it and make sure that everything's okay. But women, we have more of a need to have closure. And sometimes I have husbands who are like, "She just can't let stuff go. She just never lets stuff go," and just complaining about it. I'm like, "No, she's just being a woman.
Mm-hmm.
She needs closure, and that's okay. And it's okay for you to provide that for her so that she can feel okay." Um, Women usually have a need to feel some attention, to be treasured, to be cherished, whether that's through romance or just that you notice when she walks in the room, or you give her a hug right when you come home. And that's just a couple. If I go to the men, obviously men have a stronger need usually for sex. Men have a need for being visually stimulated. Their relational and sexual needs can be different from a woman. Men have a need for respect more often than women want to be respected, but men have a even deeper need for respect. It's like that's like oxygen to them. If you talk disrespectfully to a man, it's going to bother him a lot more usually than if you talk disrespectfully to a woman. Men have a need to lead, to be the provider, to feel like they're doing something for their family. And oftentimes a woman would be okay to not work, and she wouldn't bother her like, "Oh, I'm not providing enough." So there's just different ways that we are. Uh,
Why?
yeah, yeah.
Wow, that's good, man. You right on, girl, with the respect and all that good stuff, man. Because that's every man I know. Respect is huge.
Hmm.
That's the main thing
If
for a
you
lot of
think
men.
about how do men treat each other and how do women treat each other, you know, you think of how two guys interact with each other. It's very different. And men. A lot of this I got from I didn't come up with all this. I've read a lot of books over the years, and so Emerson Eggerichs, Love and Respect, highly recommend his program, and it has a lot of good stuff on gender differences. And he talks about men have a need for side by side companionship, whereas women have a need for face to face connection. So when two men are hanging out, they're usually sitting beside each other on the couch, looking forward, and every once in a while they'll kind of look at each other and say, "Oh, did you see that in that ball game, or whatever?" Or they're not talking at all; they're just standing beside each other fishing, and they're okay with that. But when two women get together, they turn their chairs or they turn themselves on the couch so that they're facing each other, so they are looking in each other's eyes, and they talk. And so women need to understand that their husband just needs them to be beside him sometimes. It doesn't even need her to talk. Just needs her to watch him change the tire on the car, be a cheerleader. But the man needs to understand that the woman needs some time where you are sitting face to face and you are not distracted and you are actually talking and connecting.
You giving us the business, Kelly.
That's good, Kelly.
You giving
That
us the
is
business.
so good. I never looked at it like that,
Mm-hmm.
but it's so true. Me and my guys, we don't, once a blue moon, we might be face to face, but most of the time, if it's side by side, and the women piece, all up in each other's face, kiki, and so that is so true, man. I love this, Kelly.
Yeah.
I absolutely love it. You're giving some really, really good insight on a lot of different topics. And making me look at a lot of things different for sure. So
Yeah.
good stuff, man.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
I have so I was talking to one of my clients, and she was talking about because she has a strong personality, and I have quite a few friends who have strong personalities, and some are in relationships and some are not. And so there's one in particular client I was talking to, she was like, she's trying to date, she wants to date someone, and she says to me, she said, "I need somebody who is strong, who's strong strong enough to handle me. And even with my friends who are in relationships, they are more A type females, and the guys that they are with are more, I don't know, C D type or whatever, very much so on the feminine side than the masculine side. So my question to you is, and maybe this may help women who are in those relationships or looking for a guy, um, that if you are a strong woman with a personality type, I'm not. I'm most definitely not. I am very much more feminine, and my husband is more masculine. Um, do they need a more A type partner?
I don't think so, because to get two A's together, you get a lot of this.
Mm-hmm.
And they're butting heads because they're both trying to coordinate things and decide things. And so ultimately the man is the head of the wife, especially when it comes to spiritual leadership, right? I mean, if you're disagreeing on something, the Bible tells us, the man is the leader, the man is the head. So I think there's a place for, even I'm an A type, or us A types do need to submit and realize that we are not the head spiritually. But if you're talking just, she's better at managing the household, she's better at coordinating this and that, she's better at doing the social thing, paying the bills, whatever, that's okay. That's just a personality difference. And I think if they were both doing that, there would be a lot more conflict. So it's okay if their husband is like, hey, I mean, whatever you want to do, I'm good with, as long as that's not bothering her. Now, one thing I do sometimes see is the women get a little out of control with the taking charge because their husband's letting them.
Mm-hmm.
And they're scheduling way too much for the family. They got the kids in 15 sports, and the husband doesn't speak up and say, hey, do you think maybe this isn't good for us?
Mm-hmm.
And they're afraid. They're afraid of their wife. And I'm like, you gotta, she wants you to tell her if she's going too far. You still got to speak up. And if you have a concern, share that.
So one last question, I think, for me around infidelity. How common is it? What is the statistics around infidelity? And is infidelity something that would ever end? Because I don't know.
I cannot say that I know the statistics,
Mm-hmm.
and how common it is, but in counseling, it's probably, at least 50% of the couples I see. So that doesn't mean I don't think that 50% of couples are cheating. I think that just the ones that are coming for counseling, 50% of them have. And you would be surprised that it's probably a little more often the woman than the man
Yeah.
that I see. And a lot of people, stereotypically think it's always the man. But that's not true. And will it ever end? As long as we live in a fallen, sinful world, unfortunately, I do not think it's going to. I think a lot of things have made it worse. The availability of pornography has just fueled porn addiction and sex addiction for people. Um, and just the distracted, busy world that we live in is keeping couples disconnected, and they're feeling lonely. And next thing you know, they've slipped into something that they never thought they would do. So there's a lot of factors in our world that I think are actually making it worse. So I don't see it getting better. I think it's a conscious decision that a couple has to make to be committed and to have those good boundaries for themselves. Often it is an issue of somebody not having good boundaries around their relationship with people of the opposite sex.
Right. Well, thanks for making a point, because I think every time
Yeah.
people might talk about infidelity, is always usually the idea that the man is the one that created the infidelity, but that's not always the case.
No.
So, but that's very interesting. But so, tell me this, man, based on, and this pretty much my last question or so, but what advice would you give someone? And I think there's some single people that also watch the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
What advice would you give a single man, a single woman who's looking to maybe get married? What are some of the things you think they should look for? Because I think sometimes that people get caught up in the whole exterior,
Mm-hmm.
just how he look or how fine she is or how 6 feet he is, he this, the abs or what. But then they get with this person and it's like, man, it ain't nothing what you expected, right? But what are some of the major qualities that you would just say that people need to look for before you say I do?
That's a great question. I think it's so true. I hear young people say, like, oh, I only want to be with a 10, looks wise. And it's like, well, in my experience, I hate to say it, but a lot of 10s on the outside aren't 10s on the inside.
Mhm.
And so pick a 7 on the outside, there might be a 10 on the inside.
Yeah.
So I think attraction is really important. I mean, you have to be attracted to your spouse, and oftentimes the outward appearance is what draws us to even start talking to someone in the first place. But they don't have to be perfect. You can become more attracted the more that you get to know them. So as long as you're not repulsed by them, as long as you don't think they're ugly, give them a chance, because you may be surprised at how attractive they become to you once you see their insides. And I mean, number one for me is they if you are a Christian, you got to find somebody who's also a Christian. You got to be, equally yoked. And they need to be ready. If you're looking for marriage, then you need to be looking for somebody else who is ready for marriage. And ready means they understand what that role is and they are willing to step into that. And, the Bible tells us, Ephesians chapter 5 talks about what a husband should be, what a wife should be. And so are they ready to do that? Is that something that they think they can do? And then you're looking for somebody who can communicate, who isn't super defensive, can take some criticism, or can, when you say, oh, I'm needing a little more of this, or I felt like this when this happened, watch how they respond. Can they have those kind of conversations, and can you talk through and work through problems when they come up? If you can do that and you're on the same page spiritually, helps to be on the same page politically as well, because those can be some big problems, then I think you have a good shot of being satisfied with that person. Because if you're on the same page with the things that matter and you can communicate about everything else, then you're going to make it through whatever comes up.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, that's real, man. I like it. I love it. Love it. Gail, you get some good stuff tonight, girl. I'm really, really sucking this stuff up, man. And I know I'm gonna watch this podcast
I
again
know that's what I was gonna say. I can't wait to rewatch
and
it.
just really take it all in, man, because you gave a lot of stuff. We talked about a lot of different things, right? From the resentment to
Vulnerability.
vulnerability to infidelity to forgiveness to having God in that. That's a lot, man. But it all it seems like it just all very an amazing recipe. A lot of the tools that you gave to have a successful marriage. And that's still not to say that it won't be rough times, hard times, and still challenges. But to be able to know how to deal with forgiveness and how to get over that resentment, and right, and knowing that you should have God in a part of it, right, and all those things. That's what's really going to be the recipe to help your marriage to endure all the rough times that you're going to go through, because they will come. But knowing all these things and putting these things in practice will make the process just a little bit easier when you keep all these things in mind. So great information, Kelly Case. All right, girl. Good deal. So, hey, man, so any closing remarks, man, that you would just like to say? Again, you can shout out your everything, your contact information. But any closing remarks, man, just to married couples out there that you might want to say that, that could help somebody?
Yeah, I hear everybody saying, oh, marriage is hard. Everything I look at and read, oh, marriage is hard, marriage is hard. And, marriage doesn't have to be hard. It can be hard. But I just want to give some hope. Like, my marriage is not hard. I've been married for 23 years and I don't find it hard. I find it to be like my favorite thing about my day. It is my safe place. It is my home. It is my comfort zone. It is my happy place. And I don't think it's hard. Have there been hard times? Yeah, but you know what? If you really put in the work in the beginning to work through those conflicts, to figure out how you want to handle this when it comes up, how do you want to handle that when it comes up, that's not hard later because you've already worked through all of those kinks and you figured out how to best operate together, and then you can just enjoy one another. So I think my closing remark is just to give some hope to people that, because as I think there's a lot of negativity out there about how hard marriage is, and it can be the most rewarding thing in your life. It just, sometimes you have to get through some bumps to get there. And so yeah, you can find me at firstclassmarriage.com, or you can find me on YouTube, Apple Podcast, and Spotify, and Rumble at Unhindered with Kelly Case.
I love it. Kelly Case, man, thank you so much for being on Couples Connect podcast, man.
Yes.
You have been an amazing, amazing guest, and all your information was just something to just chew on and just let it go down nice and easy, girl, nice and slow, because you wanted to savor all that flavor that you gave, man. So I appreciate you, man, for dropping so many gems and nuggets on all the topics that we discussed. And we truly, truly appreciate you, Kelly. So anything else?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, you brought about a different conversation that we've been having lately. We've not talked about resentment and vulnerability. And so I think that this is such a nice thing to add to the episodes, because it's really going to touch a lot of people. I know for me, I was all ears and toes and fingers and all of that listening to you. You gave such great information around that. And I we really appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate those sweet words, and thank you for having me.
Good deal. Well, hey, man. Well, this is Couples Connect, man. This is me and my boo. We doing this thing, man, with Kelly Case tonight. So we got to get out of here, man. So once again, fam, this is Couples Connect. Thank you for tuning in, and we out. Peace.
Bye, Kelly.
Bye.
Kelly.